Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 399. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. I got quite a bit of news to talk about in today's show. The Western countries are looking at giving another massive arms boost to Ukraine, so I'll be breaking that down on today's show. Please share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. Everything, all the shows are on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee. If you'd like to watch it, want the video version, it's up anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And then follow my Twitter feed, all the articles I write, all the shows, a lot of, other really important things I think I come across. I put on my Twitter account at @KyleAnzalone_. And with that, let's get into the show. The first article I have today, I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on March 21st. Ukrainian troops complete training early as DoD accelerates plan to send air defenses and tanks to Kiev. 65 Ukrainian soldiers have completed their training on Patriot air defense systems in the United States, the Pentagon said, announcing Washington would now send Patriot launchers and Abrams tanks to Kiev ahead of schedule. On Tuesday, Brigadier General Shane Morgan, the commander at Oklahoma's Fort Still, where the Ukrainian troops were being trained on Patriots, claimed the soldiers grasped the concepts quickly. He said, "Our assessment is that the Ukrainian soldiers are impressive and absolutely a quick study. Due to their extensive air defense knowledge and experience in a combat zone, it was easier, though never easy, for them to grasp the Patriot mission system operating and maintenance concepts." The defense official said that the training started in January with soldiers undergoing a total of 600 hours of instruction on the sophisticated surface-to-air missile platform. Though Washington has has authorized the shipments of one Patriot battery to Kiev, the Defense Department is yet to offer a firm date on when the weapons will arrive in the battlefield. Given that one Patriot battery is typically made up between 5 and 8 missile launchers and requires about 90 soldiers to operate it, it remains unclear how Kiev intends to man the system. U.S. officials initially cited those personnel requirements, as well as other lengthy training period over the platform, as reasons not to supply the Patriot launchers to Ukraine, but later reversed course and authorized the transfer. And so I think that's really important to note. It seems that they're about, I guess that'd be 25 fighters short of the 90 they would need if they only trained 65. And of course, you would think they would almost do the opposite and train twice or 3 times as many soldiers as you need, just in case it happens that, these people are obviously killed in battle or injured in battle and the system isn't. You would hope that, you would think that the United States would just plan ahead and have, make sure Ukraine has the ability to operate it even if they lose a few of these soldiers that were trained, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The Pentagon also claimed it was accelerating the timetable for sending M1 Abrams tanks to Kiev. Initially, the Department of Defense intended to purchase a new model of the weapon to send to Ukraine, but scrapped the plan after finding the process could take more than a year. However, officials said the military has opted to send an older version of the Abrams instead, hoping the new tanks will arrive in the country in 6 to 8 months. During a Tuesday briefing, the Pentagon press secretary Pat Ryder told reporters that the move is about getting important combat capability into the hands of Ukrainians sooner rather than later, adding that the tanks would need to be refurbished before the transfer. While National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the training on the Abrams would begin within a period of weeks, not months, back in January, officials have offered few details since, leaving it unclear if the instructions for the Ukrainian troops have really started. And then Dave DeCamp brought up this story. So, he leaves a little bit more detailing because this is really the focus on his story. So he says the initial plan was to manufacture 31 new M1A2 Abrams tanks, but now they're going to send Ukraine an older model. And, he brings up here that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz previously ruled out sending Ukraine tanks and explained his reasoning. He was saying he was trying to prevent a direct war between NATO and Russia, but the U.S. and its allies are less concerned about escalation and continue to ramp up the war and supporting Ukraine, including with Poland and Slovakia now pledging to send their Soviet-made MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. The next major escalation is this: UK to give Ukraine depleted uranium shells despite Russian warnings. Dave DeCamp writes on March 21st for antiwar.com, a British official has confirmed that the UK will be providing Ukraine with depleted uranium shells to be used with British-made Challenger 2 tanks, despite warnings from Russia that would be considered the use of toxic ammunition, the same as a dirty bomb. Alongside granting of a Squadron Challenger 2 main battle tanks, we will be providing ammunition which includes armor-piercing rounds which contain depleted uranium. Such rounds are highly effective in defeating modern tanks and armored vehicles, the British Deputy Defense Minister said in a written response to a question posed by the posted on the British Parliament website. Despite depleted uranium is typically created as a byproduct of producing enriched uranium and is extremely dense. Because depleted uranium munitions are radioactive, they are linked to cancer and birth defects, especially in Iraq, where U.S. forces used an enormous number of the controversial munitions during the Gulf War and the 2003 invasion. Birth defects are still common in the Iraqi city of Fallujah to this day, likely due to depleted uranium. Responding to the news, the Russian defense minister warned that sending Ukraine depleted uranium rounds brings the world closer to nuclear collision between Russia and the West, and where Moscow would respond. Naturally, Russia has something to answer this with. And this even got the Russian President Putin, to weigh in. He said, if all this happens, Russia will have to respond accordingly, given that the West collectively is already beginning to use weapons with a nuclear component. And Western powers depleted uranium. This isn't Putin. This is just a new paragraph in Dave's article. Western provided depleted uranium rounds could already be in use in Ukraine's hands, as the U.S. has refused to say if the Bradley fighting vehicles it has provided to Ukraine are armed with the toxic ammunition. Bradleys are equipped with depleted uranium, earning them the nickname tank killers. That's because depleted uranium is apparently pretty good at piercing armor. So for a while, I've been pretty skeptical and wondering if the U.S. was sending the depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine, but because we didn't get confirmation, I really wasn't sure how to proceed on this. The UK giving them makes me think that maybe the U.S. has been, and they really don't see this as an escalation. Although the Russian response saying that we would have to respond now, maybe, this is the first time they will hit the Ukrainian battlefield. We have seen the UK be out front of the U.S. on several issues, like the tanks, training Ukrainian pilots on Western-made fighter jets, long-range missiles, stuff like that. The UK has actually been out in front of the U.S. and sending those to Ukraine, even if not in as serious as numbers. Now, another weapon that we're looking at giving Ukraine, this is crazy. So we present ourselves as this great country, the shining city on the hill. The reason that we fight these wars and get involved in these wars is because we do things the right way. We protect, things going the right way. And so you would assume that we don't use weapons like cluster bombs that hurt civilians, like depleted uranium rounds that, could contaminate Ukraine for years to come, cause birth defects in Ukraine for years to come. We're better than using these munitions, but that's really not the case. So next article up here. 4 leading Republicans urge Biden to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. Leading Republicans in Congress have sent a letter to President Biden urging him to provide Kiev with cluster bombs, controversial munitions that endanger civilians by spreading small bomblets over large areas. Due to the harm they cause civilians, cluster bombs have been banned by over 100 countries over the 2008 Convention on Cluster Bombs, but Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. are not signatories to the treaty. The letter to Biden was signed by Representative Michael McCaul, a Republican from Texas, and the chair of the House Armed Foreign Affairs Committee, Representative Mike Rogers, a Republican from Alabama, the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, Senator Roger Wickers, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, and Senator Jim Risch, the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So these are the 4 most powerful Republicans in Congress on the foreign policy issue. Ukraine has been asking for the U.S. to send cluster bombs, specifically the Mk-20, an air-delivered cluster bomb, and a 155 artillery cluster shell. Both Russian and Ukrainian forces have used cluster munitions in the war. Kiev has used them in earlier years in the Donbass war against populated areas of the Donetsk in 2014. And I've seen some pictures and even reporting in Western media sources that Ukraine has deployed these butterfly bomblets. They're like little mines, and I think they're essentially, delivered somehow from a larger payload. And these have spread all over the Donbass. So in the letter, the Republican lawmakers urged Biden to send the cluster munitions, including dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, which have several types of variants and are available in the 155 millimeter artillery rounds. And then they also want Biden to send GMLRS rockets that Ukraine has been using with the HIMARS system and the Army tactical rockets, which have a range of up to 200 miles that the U.S. has not yet provided Kiev, but certain lawmakers in the U.S. have been begging for the U.S. to send Kiev longer range munitions recently, despite the fact that we're already sending them JDAMs with extended range. So according to the lawmakers, the U.S. has 3 million rounds of DPICMs available. They argue that sending the widely banned munitions could alleviate pressure over U.S. stockpiles. They said Ukrainian leaders are aware of the risks to non-combatants associated with cluster bombs, but say the risk to civilian pales in comparison to the threat that's posed by Moscow. Next up, we had the U.S. announcing another tranche of weapons for Ukraine. The U.S. on Monday announced a new $350 million arms package for Ukraine that includes ammunition for HIMARS rocket launchers, artillery rounds, and high-speed anti-radiation missiles. These are the ones that I think target radars, the harms. The arms are being sent to Ukraine via the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows Biden to ship Kiev weapons and equipment directly from Pentagon stockpiles. The funds are pulled from a $45 billion congressional aid bill passed in December. According to the Pentagon, the full package includes ammunition for HIMARS, 155 millimeter artillery rounds, 25 millimeter ammunition, the HARMS, 81 millimeter and 60 millimeter mortar systems and mortar rounds, AT-4 anti-armor weapon systems, grenade launchers, small arms, and associated ammunition, demolition munitions and equipment for obstacle clearing, mine clearing equipment, heavy fuel tankers, thermal imagery systems, optics, and laser range finders. I had talked about this on the show that there were some questions about how the JDAMs are being delivered, and they do have laser guided JDAMs. So I'm not sure if these range finders could possibly be for that. Rivervine patrol boats, testing and diagnostic equipment for support vehicles, maintenance and repair, and then spare parts and other field equipment. The Pentagon also released a fact sheet on Monday that said the U.S. has now pledged over $32.5 billion in military equipment for Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion in February 24, 2022. The new package comes after the Pentagon officials told the New York Times that the upcoming ammunition shipments were part of a last-ditch effort to help Ukraine on the battlefield as the Ukrainian forces are using artillery rounds at an unsustainable rate. According to the fact sheet, the U.S. has pledged over 1.5 million 105 millimeter artillery rounds to Ukraine. Now, my understanding is we could only make about 20,000 of those shells right now a month. And then I believe NATO is trying to put together with the U.S. where we're sending, probably hundreds of thousands of shells. The other countries will send hundreds of thousands, and that would get Ukraine another 105 millimeter artillery shells. Although, who knows how much of a difference this will make if he'll get to the battlefield in time, and exactly how many of these weapons are actually making it to the front lines. But Ukraine is apparently using tens of thousands of these rounds all the time, and really the West, from signals that a lot of people are pointing out, they just can't keep up with the production at the rate that Ukraine is using it. All right, I got another pretty important story I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on March 21st. The U.S. Army has officially opened its first permanent military garrison on NATO's eastern flank in a ceremony on Tuesday. Stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the eastern portion of the North Atlantic Bloc is made up of 8 nations, all former members of the USSR or Warsaw Pact. The U.S. Army's V Corps will now have a lasting presence at Camp Kusawoko in Poland. The V Corps commanding general, Lieutenant General John Kolishki, explained the garrison showed Washington is deepening its military commitments in Eastern Europe. He said the relationship of the U.S. and Poland serves as an example of the deepening ties throughout the alliance, adding, today's activation ceremony is a tangible reminder of the growth in our relationship. As the Soviet Union crumbled in the early 1990s, Western leaders repeatedly assured Moscow that NATO would not expand to the former USSR states or establish bases in Eastern Europe. However, since the George H.W. Bush administration offered those guarantees, all subsequent U.S. presidents have violated the pledge and pushed NATO's military footprint closer to Russia's borders. The Polish defense minister described the garrison as historic, saying that the Warsaw has been striving for this for years, for the word permanent, and now it has become a fact. He continued, this is a historic moment, a sign that the United States is committed to Poland and NATO, and that we are united in the face of Russian aggression. So whatever Washington might want to claim, the polls are saying very directly that this is about Russia. The Pentagon currently has 2 officers stationed at the camp in Poland and additional 200 troops at the base on a rotational basis. As Washington already keeps about 10,000 troops in Poland, and analysis for the Polish Institute of International Affairs argued that the significance of the new garrison is primarily symbolic, but he did say there is also a political component to it as well. Poland has been a key hub for Western arms shipments to Ukraine given its location. While this particular garrison is not located near a border, an American diplomat explained the garrison was created to confront Russia. In a statement shared on Twitter, the U.S. ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzezinski, said that the decision to open the long-term base proves that the United States is committed to Poland and the NATO alliance, and that we are united in the face of Russian aggression, using verbiage nearly identical to Warsaw's defense chief. All right, so we had a couple days of talks between Russia and China that I believe just ended this morning. So my guess is I'm going to have more to say about this in the coming days, but just for a kind of an early breakdown of what occurred during that meeting, Putin says China's peace plan could serve as the basis for a settlement in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin said during a meeting with the Chinese president in Moscow on Tuesday that the 12-point peace plan put forward by Beijing could be the basis for a potential settlement in Ukraine. We believe in the many points on the peace plan put forward by China, Putin said. Beijing's proposal calls for a cessation of hostilities and for both sides to resume peace talks. Putin expressed doubt that Kiev or its Western backers are ready for negotiations, saying the Chinese proposal could be used as a foundation when the West and Kiev are ready for it. The Biden administration has come out strongly against the Chinese mediation efforts, as the White House said it is against calls for a ceasefire. But Ukraine is open to discussing the issues with China, and the Chinese president is expected to call Zelensky following his trip to Moscow, which wraps up on Wednesday. Zelensky said Tuesday that he asked Beijing for talks on a peace formula for Ukraine. Zelensky has put forward his own peace proposal, which calls for the withdrawal of U.S. troops and for a war crime tribunal. Zelensky said, "We offered China to become a partner in the implementation of the peace formula. We pass over our formula across all channels. We invite you to a dialogue. We are waiting for your answer." And of course, those demands from Zelensky are non-starters, but hopefully, he is just putting that forward, hoping that China will engage in talks and then some kind of settlement could be made. But my guess is that isn't the case. And like we've seen in the previous, year of this war, year and month of this war, a lot of the proposals put forward by the West, by Kiev, I think are meant to be non-starters, so they could kind of pretend that they're interested in peace, but really they're not putting anything forward that could facilitate any kind of talks. So after holding talks for hours on Tuesday, Putin and Xi put forward a joint statement that said China believes Russia is ready to start peace talks. The Chinese side positively assesses the willingness of the Russian side to make an effort to restart peace talks as soon as possible, the statement said. The statement also said Russia welcomes China's readiness to play a positive role in the political development, settlement of the Ukraine crisis, and the constructive ideas set forth in the document drawn up by the Chinese side. Of course, we have American officials just straight up saying that they don't want a ceasefire at this time. All right, now let's move on and talk about the U.S. relationship with China. Former Taiwanese president to make historic visit to mainland China. The former president of Taiwan, that is Ma Ying-yu, will lead a delegation to mainland China next week in an effort to improve cross-strait relations as tensions are soaring in the region. The trip will be historic as no Taiwanese president, whether former or sane, has visited China since Chiang Kai-shek and his forces fled to Taiwan in 1949 following their defeat in the Civil War against the Communist Party of China. Today, the KMT is the main opposition party and favors friendlier relations. KMT is the party of Chiang Kai-shek and favors friendlier relations with Beijing than the ruling Democrat Progressive Party, DPP. The DPP and President Tai, who's the current leader of Taiwan, have taken steps to significantly boost ties with the U.S., resulting in more Chinese military pressure on the island, making the conflict seem much more likely. Ma served as president from 2008 to 2016 and is still a senior leader in the KMT. The executive director of Ma's foundation said there should be more exchanges between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. Instead of buying more weapons, it would be better to increase exchanges between the young people of the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. The executive director of Ma's foundation said, according to the Chinese South China Morning Post, the more they are able to promote their friendship, the less risk there will be. So this is interesting. It seems like a positive step. Now, all the steps going in the wrong direction. Taiwan confirms that its president will stop in the U.S. next week. This again from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Taiwan confirmed on Tuesday that President Tai will visit the U.S. on her way to Central America, but does not say if she will hold talks with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. According to media reports, Taiwan convinced McCarthy to meet with Tai in California rather than in Taipei over concerns his trip would provoke more Chinese military pressure when the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi traveled to Taiwan in August 2022. It sparked the largest ever Chinese military drills. Taiwanese officials said Tai's delegation will leave Taipei on March 29th and will stop in California and New York before heading to Belize and Guatemala. Tai has made similar visits to the U.S., most recently in 2019. So this does seem to be a walk back from the American Taiwanese side, as you know, they were initially planning on doing this in Taiwan, which likely would provoke a major reaction from Beijing. My guess is that Beijing is still very opposed to this, is going to be very upset, particularly if she meets with Kevin McCarthy. However, likely a smaller reaction than had McCarthy traveled to the island. Now, Taiwan's military shelves the law that would criminalize spreading rumors. This, looked to be a real severe crackdown on free speech, and it looks like it's going to be held up for now and hopefully never passed in Taiwan, so those people have a little bit more freedom. But this from Dave DeCamp on March 20th. He writes, Taiwan's military has agreed to temporarily put a hold on a controversial proposed amendments to a law that would criminalize the spread of rumors during times of war, the South China Morning Post reported on Monday. The changes to the Taiwanese Defense Ministry has proposed to the All-Out Defense Mobilization Readiness Act would put government controls on all media when Taiwan is mobilized for conflict. It would punish spreading rumors or disinformation during wartime with 3 years in prison or a $32,000 fine. The amendments caused backlash and drew comparisons to the time Taiwan was under martial law from 1949 to 87, known as the White Terror period. During that time, Taiwan had a secret police known as the Taiwan garrison command that was responsible for silencing dissent and carried out secret executions. Another aspect of the amendments would require education authorities to provide lists of students aged 18 and up, raising concerns among parents that their children could be drafted. The proposal came after the Taiwanese president Tai extended Taiwan's compulsory military service from 4 months to 1 year, which will take effect in 2024. Members of Taiwan's main opposition party, the KMT, said that the law did not define the mobilization preparedness period well enough and warned that the ruling Democratic Progressive Party could take advantage of the vagueness to consolidate power. Now, just a couple more stories here. This, I think, is a really, really big one, and really good on Dave DeCamp to find this and write it up. A report, U.S. provided unprecedented intelligence to India during border clash with Chinese troops in 2022. So let's get into this and break it down. The U.S. provided India with unprecedented intelligence sharing during a clash between Indian and Chinese troops in December 2022 along the disputed border high in the Himalayas, known as the Line of Actual Control, U.S. News reported on Monday. The report cited current and former U.S. military officials who said the intelligence sharing was possible thanks to military pact Washington and New Delhi signed in 2020, known as the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. We covered that on this show. The deal was inked following deadly clashes between Chinese and Indian troops along the LAC in the Galwan Valley that killed 20 Indian soldiers and at least 4 Chinese troops. And I also think the U.S. agreed to that because they're just trying to pull all the countries that have borders with China to be more opposed to China, less likely to negotiate with them. And I think this is one of the way that the U.S. sees that as able to do this with China, and that is by helping out India here. So not only are we arming up Taiwan and other countries in the Indo-Pacific, but we're also arming India with more intelligence here. Dozens of injuries were reported in the December 2022 clashes, but there were no deaths. Chinese and Indian troops deployed to the region are not armed with any guns and typically battle with spy clubs along the LAC. According to U.S. News, the U.S. provided India with real-time details of China's positions and its force strength ahead of the clashes, which sources say were sparked by Chinese military incursions and Indian troops maneuvered to intercept the Chinese forces. The information included satellite imagery and was more detailed and delivered faster than anything the U.S. provided before. One source told U.S. News they were waiting, and that's because the U.S. had given India everything to be fully prepared for this. It demonstrates a test case of the success of how two militaries are now cooperating and sharing intelligence. The clash could have been provoked by U.S. joint and Indian military drills that were conducted days before that and were held 60 miles from the disputed border. China's foreign ministry said the exercises violated border agreements. While in the Himalayas, a U.S. Army unit that was deployed there conducted a promotion ceremony in the view of the Nanda Devi, the second tallest mountain in India. They also held a rock concert that soldiers performed in. Both events were publicized by the U.S. Army. Several current and foreign officials said the events appear to be designed to anger China. While ties between the U.S. and India have fractured over New Delhi's relationship with Russia, the close military cooperation continues as the U.S. views India as a useful ally against China. India is a member of the Quadrilateral Dialogue, by the way, as well, a group that the U.S. is trying to put together as a bulwark against Beijing. China is making its own moves to counter what the U.S. is doing. China and Cambodia have launched their first ever NATO drills as the two Asian nations continue to forge stronger ties despite objections from Beijing. And then let's move on here and talk quickly about the Middle East. This is some good news. Warring sides in Yemen agreed to prisoner swap to release over 800 detainees. I've seen a lot of reports lately that the war in Yemen could be officially ending soon. I really, really hope so. I think this coming on the heels of the China brokered agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a very good sign. We'll see in the coming weeks, and hopefully I'll have more good news to report here. Last story up today. I wrote this for the Libertarian Institute. 43,000 Somalis starved to death in 2022. That's according to the UN. I write, the United Nations estimates that 43,000 Somalis starved to death last year. At least half of those who died are said to have been children less than 5 years old. The Horn of Africa nation is suffering from a drought, as well as U.S. military campaign targeting the insurgent group Al-Shabaab. At the end of the Donald Trump presidency, he ordered to withdraw all American forces from Somalia. After taking office, President Joe Biden ordered soldiers to return to Somalia, provided millions in military assistance to Mogadishu, and increased drone strikes in the country. Meanwhile, at the beginning of 2022, the UN reported over 1 million Somalis will suffer from acute malnutrition because of a drought. In a joint statement from the Somali government, the United Nations, and the World Health Organization, it stated that the death toll could have been much worse and warned 2023 could see tens of thousands of people starve to death. These estimates suggest that although famine has been averted for now, the crisis is far from over. Despite years of American intervention, the UN says 17 million Somalis remain in need of humanitarian aid. Additionally, 35,000 people could starve to death in the first 6 months of 2023. Throughout 2022, the U.S. regularly bombed Somalia. The Pentagon will occasionally release a statement confirming the airstrike, typically asserting a handful of Al-Shabaab militants were killed in the strike. Rarely is there any media coverage given to any confirmation of the assertions from the Department of Defense. In January, one such strike was investigated and 7 Somali civilians were found to have been killed. The uptick in violence in Somalia in 2022 made it the deadliest year for civilians in the country since 2017. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to check out the Institute, check out antiwar.com. If you follow me on Twitter, retweet, put out as much of my stuff as you can. I really appreciate it. I think I'm writing important news. And of course, I'm always looking for, a few more people to tune into the show or to read my writing. So I really appreciate it when you do that. Thanks, everyone.